Hello, and welcome to our video on the Volanté Enterprise VE solution. And today's video will be talking about our manager point of sale functions and how they differ from our standard cashier functions. Some of our functions that we can expect to work with from the point of sale terminal are similar to our cashier. We will be swiping our card to log in, but we do have additional overrides available. We'll look at how we clock in as our POS admin cashier level user, some of our cashier screen overrides, including our manager override function, some of our cashier screen manager function changes, including our price change feature and refund mode, as well as viewing of transaction and open transaction modes. We'll also take a look at some of our manager admin screen functions, including the Synch status manager, how to reset printers, our POS user management screen, our barcode management screen, as well as some of our manager end of day reporting and close day features. Let's begin. At the start of your shift, you will need to clock in, and as per Morrison policy, you will be using your swipe card. We do not provide our employees with a number to type in on this screen. Everybody must be provided a swipe card. I'll go ahead and swipe my card to begin. Now, as we can see, I've come to my home screen. From here, I'll choose to clock in, and we'll see that my clock in has changed to my admin cashier status. Generally, you'll see POS admin cashier at this place. I'm going to log back out just for a moment, and by logging out, really, I'm just coming back to the sign-in screen. I'm not logging out from the entire system. One thing I can do from here as well is to override my login as a particular employee. I'll set the slider to on, and I'll swipe my card again. As we can see, I can now act as any other user in the system who has the same or lower security level that I do. In this case, I'll go ahead and choose Mark and say OK. As we can see, I've now come into the system as Mark, and he is clocked in cashier mode. Let's go to cashier mode as our standard user. And as before, we have our menu to the left-hand side and our cashier action keys to the right. Our cashier is prevented from doing certain functions without a manager override. We'll come to our next page area, and we'll open our cash drawer as if we were starting our shift as a cashier. As we can see, this function does require a manager's override, so our swipe card is required. Cash drawer at this point would now have opened for our cashier to put their cash tray in for their day. Other functions, including reopening of past transactions, do not require a manager override in some cases. However, your site may require the manager override, and the swipe card would be required. Similarly, opening the last transaction does require a manager override. So again, we would swipe our card in order to resume our last transaction. I'm going to return to our previous page and just exit from this and go back to my home screen. There are some new functions available only to managers, however, and we'll take a look at those on our cashier mode with our manager account. I've logged out and I'm returning back in as my manager user, and I'll come into cashier mode. One of our new functions is located on our next page and is called Set Item Price. The Set Item Price allows us to change the pricing of our items directly from our quick menu. This is really helpful during our go live when the majority of our prices may be at $99 or when we run across items that have a $0 price. When I change my pricing, I'm changing the price for my price level if I'm using one for my specific area, or it will change the price on the default pricing for the item in the back office. I'll go ahead and change the pricing on this garlic and spice roasted broccoli. My first step is to add the item into our transaction by pressing on the item. Once the item has been added into our transaction, I'll now press the Set Item Price key, and I get my Set Item Price dialog window. From here, I can touch on the price, and I can enter a new price for our item. I'll confirm the price. Notice how the price for the item has changed. However, the price on the item that was entered into my transaction remains the same as it was. So if I would like to sell this item now, I'll touch the item, remove the item, and re-enter the item into my transaction at the corrected price. I could now total out my transaction and complete my sale. If I'm making changes to multiple items, I can add the items into my transaction, set the price. We'll do a couple price changes, for example, here. Now, we can notice that the prices have changed on the items themselves. And maybe I didn't want to sell the items. Maybe I'm just doing some price corrections to the items on my menu. At this point now, I could void all items from my transaction, choose to remove all and say yes, and go to my previous page and total. So this will create a blank transaction. However, I have changed the pricing on my items, and now they're ready to go for my daily sales. Another new section we have access to is located in our next page and choosing refund mode. As we can see, when I pressed the refund mode, the bar at the top is changed red and now notes refund mode. Everything entered into my transaction at this point will be going in on a negative. If I'd like to return back to my standard transaction mode, I simply hit the same button, which does change between refund and standard for each button press. From here, I can enter the items that are to be refunded, and as we can see, they do go in at their negative prices. And I would complete my transaction, whether it's the cash or credit card, based on the original transaction type. I'll choose cash. $6.70 will be returned back to our user, and we're done our transaction. Notice how it does take me out of refund mode by default. So if I am doing several refunds together, I do have to return back into refund mode for each transaction. Let's go ahead and exit back to our home screen now. I'll choose to go to my home. And from here, we'll take a look at our view transactions, open transactions, and some of our administrative functions here today as well. So let's take a look at our view transactions area. The View Transactions area will let us see all transactions that have taken place throughout the day for either ourselves or for all users within the system. In this case, the default is to your sales. We can use the drop-down to view all sales, or we can view the sales for a particular cashier. I can also set the date and time range in here to view transactions from previous date ranges. So in this case, we'll touch our first time to set the start. And we can touch the last to set the last date we want to see transactions for. And we can see transactions for a particular date range for a particular user or for all users. I can also see transactions of particular types. Generally, closed only is the default, but I can see all transactions if any transactions are still open, any transactions that are open still, any incomplete transactions from auto close, or any refund transactions that took place during a certain time window. I'm going to default us back to today's date, so we can see transactions from today only. As we can see, I do have the one transaction that is a refund that I processed earlier in this video. If I'd like to see the details of this refund transaction, I can touch on the transaction, and I do see the information here. Let's go back to some more basic transactions. I'm going to set us to all transactions for now. We can see all sales by all cashiers for today using all transactions to view. I can go ahead and touch on a transaction, and we can see the information, the date and time, the transaction number, and the items that were purchased, and totals and payment methods that were done. To support policy, when our cashiers enter items into a sale that the customer has changed their mind on, generally we would cash out the transaction, keep a copy of the transaction record in the cash drawer, and at the end of the day, the manager is responsible for voiding out those cashed transactions. So in this case, we'll take a basic transaction that was completed. Let's do this $10.11 one for these items. And to void this transaction, I would simply hit the void button. Do you wish to void this transaction? We cannot undo it. We'll say yes. So now we have information up here that a void has been successfully performed, and this transaction, as we can see, has gone back to $0. When we void a transaction, it's a transaction that's being altered. So we do have a transaction that has a payment in it, and we're going back and making changes within the same transaction. This is different than performing a refund, where we have an original transaction and we have a new transaction in order to give the customer back money. So again, two different methods of handling the return of funds or the canceling out of a payment. We also have indicator icons in here based on color. So green is telling me these are transactions that have been completed and closed. Yellow are transactions that have not been closed successfully. And I can confirm this by using the dropdown and taking a look at opened only, which is showing me these two transactions. So we know for some reason these transactions were not completed. We'll take a look at how we can resolve this issue as well in a moment. I'm going to go back to all transactions. We'll talk a little bit more about voiding. When we have a transaction that has payments other than just cash in them, we may have to reopen the transaction in order to process a void. So I do have a transaction in here that had a credit card error in it. Well, the credit card transaction was not completed. Maybe the customer had forgot their card or failed to swipe. When I try to void this transaction, it will ask me if I'd like to void, and we'll say yes. We do get an error. There are non-cash payments in the transaction. Please reopen to void the transaction instead. So in this case, I'll go ahead and choose the reopen button up here in the top left, which brings my transaction back on screen. This will give me an opportunity to now touch on the payments that were processed. And we're going to go ahead and choose to void. So in this case, I'm going to void the cash payment. So I've voided out the cash payment. So now I'm going to go to the next page. I'm going to choose void all to remove all items from the transaction. We'll say yes. All voided items are here. There are outstanding payments on the transaction, however. So I will come back to previous page, hit total. It is a zero balance, and reclose the transaction. Because this transaction was opened as another employee, in this case, Mark, our cashier, I can either close as Mark or as myself. Best is to close as the manager who's doing the override in this case. So I'll close as myself. So again, it's defaulted back to my sales only. I do want to view all sales, and I want to view all transactions. So I do have a transaction now that has been voided. We can see everything has been voided out. All of our payments are gone, and everything has been resolved for these transactions that are now zeroed out on void. There are other functions we can perform from this screen as well. If our customer has lost their receipt and would like a reprint, we can hit the More button and choose to do a print receipt from this screen. I can also refund directly from within this screen as well by choosing the transaction, choosing More, and choosing to issue a refund. This only works for cash transactions. If the payment method was a credit card or any other payment methods, you will need to perform a refund manually from within the cashier screen. So in this case, I'll choose to refund. It asks me, do you want to refund the transaction? Before I hit the refund transaction button, note that our original transaction is 115. I'm going to choose to refund the transaction. It does tell me that 115 was refunded successfully for $4.89. I'm going to close this. And notice that there's no change to my transaction. As we talked about earlier, a refund is a separate transaction. We have an original transaction, but we will also have a refund transaction. So notice that the items remain the same. The payment method was the same. However, we have two separate transactions. So there is the ability to refund from this screen, but as noted, if we are working with a payment method other than cash, generally from here, we cannot issue a refund as we get an error about non-cash payments within this transaction. So in this case, we do need to go back to cashier mode and create a refund manually at this point. Well, our More screen does contain an advanced action section. This section is not available for manager functions at this time. We do also have the ability to do advanced searching within our transactions by hitting our slider icon in the top right of the screen. This allows me to filter by a number of different views. In this case, I can view all payments, cash, credit card, or discounted transactions only. So I'll go ahead and choose discounted payments. I can choose POS modes, cashier mode, or standard quick service. So generally, leaving it in all POS modes is going to give us our best results. I can also view transactions from the terminal or our server. So generally, leaving it on our terminal is for the best. But I can also set my filter to be opened or closed all terminals, only at selected terminals, or closed at selected terminals. So again, I do have a choice of defining this depending on the number of machines I have available in my location as well. So I'll choose opened or closed. I want to see all of my discount payments only, and I'm going to apply my filter. And again, I have nothing at this point showing any discounted transactions, but I do have a little blue dot on here indicating I'm in filtering mode. So let's clear our filter. I'm going to go ahead and choose to reset our filter, apply, and notice that our blue dot has disappeared and all of my transactions have returned back. So this gives us the ability to alter and change some of our transactions. If we do see transactions with our yellow dots on them, we can touch that transaction and we can choose to open it or void it or close it. So in this case, if I choose to close it, what will happen is it will close our transaction out as cash. Would you like to pay the remaining balance as a cash payment on this transaction? So while we can force close this transaction, it will cause our reconciliation to be out by that cash amount if we don't go back and void it. So again, generally closing in this method, while it can be done, may not give you the best results. I'll choose yes, just so we can see what happened. Are we going to close it as the person who started the transaction or as myself? In this case, I'll go ahead and close it as myself. Okay, so our transaction's up here at the top. We do see it closed out at $8. Notice how our close button has grayed out. In this case, I am going to choose to void it. I don't want to keep that $8 charge on my account at the moment, as it will throw my reconciliation off at the end of the day. So when it comes to these open transactions, often it's best to open the transaction, make any corrections, void out the items, or we can simply choose to void from here. Do you wish to void everything? We'll say yes. And now the transaction has been voided instead. This only removes the items and any payments. However, the transaction is still open. We do need to close this transaction still. So, better method, let's void out our items and any payments, and then we'll close it. Now it's okay. We're at $0. We're closing it, and we won't have any challenges with our reconciliation at the end of the day because we're back to zero balance again. I'm going to go ahead and hit the home icon and return back to our home screen. Next, we'll take a look at our open transactions. Open transaction mode is used for today's transactions only and is not used to make any changes, views, corrections, or reprints to previous day transactions. So in this case, when I choose open transactions, what it shows for me is any open transactions from today. Similar to our transaction view, we can change our filters to view our sales, all sales, our particular cashier's sales if we like. But do note that I am unable to change my date filter. So this is really a good place to come to correct any open transactions from today only that may be preventing our close day from running or causing us any challenges with our reconciliation. I do have a simplified filter for opened or any incomplete from our auto close process. Auto close is our system's way of closing the day for us, so we don't have to manually close day every day. When we close our day, this prevents any changes being made to any of those transactions moving forward. So if we need to make a correction for a customer, in this case, we would issue a refund on another day. We wouldn't try to go back and void a transaction, which really should only be done for the current day anyway. I'm going to go back to opened only for all sales. And we do see I've got our transactions here that are in yellow status, telling me that they are incomplete. So as before, I can choose to void first. Let's void out the information. Now we have it on 0, and I will close it and say yes. I'll just close it as myself as the manager. Notice how it's disappeared from my list. If I'd like, I can also go into my transaction and choose to open it, where I could make corrections to any payments that may have been taken. I can also go into next page, choose to void all, remove all of our transactions, total it, and close it. So as we can see, all of our transactions that were still open from today have been resolved. I have nothing in my open or my incomplete list. So this is a good way of making some quick corrections and views to any transactions that may still be open and may be causing any challenges to your close day or your cash counts. I'm going to hit the home button to return back to my home screen. Next, we'll take a look at our admin area, and do note that this area is not accessible to standard cashiers. So I'm going to go ahead and log out, and I'm going to go back in as my cashier user and try to hit my admin screen button here. Notice how I do not have permission to perform this action. So I'm going to go ahead and log back out again. I'm going to swipe my card, and I'm going to come back into my home screen. And again, we can see that I am the user up here at the top. I'll enter my admin screen by touching the admin button, and I do have a number of different buttons available to me to use from here. Generally, you will not find anything in the additional levels area, but we do have a number of functions available to us as a manager that we can do. We'll talk a bit about Synch Status Manager and how we can use this from our terminal. And this does give us an indication of all machines and what their current status is for data sync. And our data sync is a way of getting information between our back office to our terminals or between our terminals for updates. Things like price changes, additional users who've been added to the system, and so on. So we will come back and talk a bit more about how we do our data syncs here in a few moments. For now, I'm going to hit done and return back to my screen. We have an option here for reset printers. This does allow me to reset our printers on our terminal if need be. This is something that generally we would suggest calling into our support team to help troubleshoot with you, just in case there's a hardware challenge that needs to be resolved as well. In this case, I've selected my printer on this machine. I've selected it. I can choose to do a test print. I do know that this receipt printer is currently turned off, so I would expect to find an error message here in a moment with my test print. It says printing is in progress. Please check the selected printer. If I do not receive a printout from the printer at this time, chances are there is a challenge with my printer that needs to be resolved. In this case, I'm going to hit select, and it does try to restart my printer. This does take a few moments as information is being sent from our software to our hardware. And we'll just give it a moment to see what we get. If there is a failure in your printer, you will get a message similar to something went wrong while initializing the printer. Please try again later. Again, working with our reset printer function is recommended with our support team. Let's skip over our end of day functions for the moment, but we will return back to them. Let's talk a little bit about our POS user management. So when I come into this screen, it does allow me to make updates or add new cashiers to our system. As a manager, you will generally be doing this fairly often from the point of sale side. I'm going to go ahead and add a new user into our system for today. So we simply hit the Create POS User button at the top, and then we'll start adding in names. You can use your virtual keypad on screen to enter the name of your cashier. And then hit enter. We generally don't need the email or phone number for this user, but I will provide them a user login. So based on Morrison policy, we do not provide a keypad entry number for this person. So what we'll do in this case is we're going to use their first initial. last name. As they have a short name, I'm just going to enter RA in this case. If you do have multiple users with the same name, so maybe you've got multiple John Smith, you could put J Smith 1, J Smith 2, but just having letters in this entry field will prevent a person from typing in a keypad number. I'll just leave RA for now and hit enter. My last step is to enter a user card. I can touch on this field and I can either manually enter in the number that I find below the black magnetic stripe on the back of the card, or I can also swipe the card at this time. I know it was quick, but there was a number entered there. We can see the number here on screen. My last step is to enter their POS role. Do not press the plus add POS role link here. It will show us what happens when we do, however. So in this case, it allows me to enter multiple roles for a user. Generally, we're doing simple entry. We're choosing a cashier, we're choosing a POS admin. In this case, I'll choose POS admin cashier. I don't need to set a rate at this time. If I do not delete the blank role, it does not allow me to save this new cashier. So I will delete the extra role, and notice how I do have a confirm button now available. I'll go ahead and confirm. And I do have a new user in here. They are a POS admin cashier, and I was able to add this person in as they have a lower role than I do. So as a BO admin cashier, I do have access as a POS cashier, as a cashier. It allows me to enter the roles. Generally, as a manager, you will have a POS admin cashier job type. This allows you to add other POS admin cashiers or cashiers to the system. Now, if our user has been newly added, we may not be able to alter them immediately. I can alter other users who have been previously in the system and confirm. But as I have not synced my newly created users to my back office, I cannot make any changes to a user at this time. Notice I'm going to get an error message. So I'm going to hit confirm. And I do have an error that's popped up. I do not have this employee is not found. So as we spoke about earlier, we do need to perform a data sync in order for this information about our user to get to our back office and get to our other terminals. So I'm going to choose Sync Status Manager at this time after I've added or updated or changed any of my users. So I'm going to go ahead and choose to do a setup change. I'm going to leave all terminal groups, and I'm going to choose Sync this terminal. And it is going to think for a few moments and send that information down to our terminals to update the back office and to update any additional machines that may need the data about that particular user. We will see information appearing about success status messages, and pending will show up for any terminals that have not yet received or updated with the change. I can hit refresh at this time to see if any changes have taken place to my updating process. I know that some of my machines will not update as they are only for testing purposes for this video. I'm going to go ahead and hit done. Now, if I come back to my user management, I should now be able to update my user. So I'll go ahead, modify the user's login, hit enter. Let's try to confirm it and see if it works now. As we can see, I was able to update my user without the error message appearing. So data sync, similar to what we would do from the back office, is very important for some of the functions we'll be talking about today. So please remember, create your users or update your users from our POS user management button, and then come to our Sync Status Manager area, change our dropdown to Setup, and sync this terminal, which will put the changes from this terminal up to the cloud and back down to every other terminal that needs that information. So let's take a look now at our barcode management function. This allows us to scan barcoded items and change our pricing directly from our POS terminal. When we choose the barcode management, by default, we're not showing any data. Let's take a look at our barcode management section. This area allows us to change our pricing on our barcoded items by scanning them in at the POS terminal. If we don't have a copy of the item in our back office, we may be prompted to download it. But let's take a look at some of these scenarios. I'll choose our barcode management area, which by default is blank until I start working with barcodes. I can also choose to enter the barcode and type the barcode number in manually from this screen using the virtual keypad if I wish, or I can scan my barcode at any time. So let's go ahead and scan a barcode. And we do have the item in our system already, so I can see the menu and category that it lives in, as well as the name of the item. From here, I can set our price by using my virtual keypad. I'll go ahead and choose Enter and choose to update it. So now this item does exist in my menu and has been updated. And if I scan the item again, it does come up with the corrected price. I'll hit Cancel for now. Let's try the same thing with an item that does not yet exist in my menu. I'm going to go ahead and scan an item. As we can see, I get a little bit more information. I still have the menu and category and the name of the item, and a price that is by default set to 0. Now, I do suggest leaving the sliders enabled, and we'll just go ahead and update our price. It's the same type of setup as before. We'll go ahead and type in our number on our virtual keypad, but I do have an option now to download and update. So this is going to take a moment longer, and it is downloading the item from the global menu and bringing it to my back office. We see a few different status messages appear. This item existed and I did a price update. This one was simply scanned and no changes made, and this one was downloaded and updated. When I'm done, I do want to make sure the changes I'm making are going to replicate to all of my POS terminals. So similar to our employee setup, I'll go back, and it does remind me a terminal setup sync is required. So I'll say OK, come to my sync status manager, change transactions to setup, and choose to sync this terminal. So I'll just give this a moment. And again, the more barcodes you scan and make changes to, the longer the sync may take, again, as we're transmitting data through the network. It does put me back to my main home screen at this time, and we can test to see if some of our newly created items do work. So let's go ahead and go to cashier mode. And as always, we can mix and match our standard items with our barcoded items. And I'll go ahead and scan that barcode. And that item we created before, our chia pudding, with our $2.99 price, is now a scannable item at our POS. So I'll hit total and cash and complete our transaction. Go ahead and exit back to our home screen, and we'll return to admin. One of the other functions we can do from our admin options screen is to choose to exit or restart our point of sale software. So if I choose the button, it does prompt me to toggle full screen, which by default the system is already in. We can also choose to restart our software or exit our software to the main desktop screen. I'll go ahead and choose exit. So this will exit our software and bring us back to the desktop screen in order for us to either restart the software or restart the system. As we can see, I've now come to our Volanté desktop screen, where I can relaunch the point of sale by double touching my screen. I can reboot the hardware, or I can shut down the terminal. The config screen is used for the Volanté support team to help troubleshoot your system, as well as the support button here. If we ever need to call support, they may ask you to exit the software and launch a support, which will give them the information needed to access your system. In this case, I'll go ahead and double touch on the Volanté POS icon, and we're going to relaunch our software. If you do double touch it more than once, you may get the system attempting to load the software multiple times. And if you do see any error messages, you can click on OK to close. As we notice, I am back to my main screen. And from here, I can go ahead and swipe my card and continue on back to my admin area. Restarting the software will perform a similar function where the software will exit and restart on its own without the need to access the shortcut from the desktop. Let's go back to our Sync Status Manager now and talk about a few pieces of information we find in here. By default, the Sync Status does default to transactions. Our transactions are syncing directly from our terminals to our back office, and we generally don't need to force a sync on them. The information does trickle constantly. I could choose to sync all terminals now if I like. However, again, I'm not concerned about my status as they're both showing success. I do also have the ability to sync setup changes, customers, and users. Anytime I make changes to my setup, so including my menu items as we just saw, I would normally go to setup. From here, I would choose to sync this terminal, which would then send changes from this machine up to the cloud and then back down to all terminals in my space. When we talk about customer database, this is information that is constantly trickling as well. So again, you may see in progress showing up in gray, pending in blue, or success in green. These are all fairly common messages. Generally, POS user information, we don't need to sync. It does sync on its own as well. So returning back to setup, if you do see any of your terminals sitting in a pending status for an extended period of time, and you do expect that they are online and working, please do reach out to support for assistance in troubleshooting your sync. We can also choose terminals in particular groupings. Some locations may have multiple groups of terminals. So for example, you may have some terminals in your cafeteria, some in a Starbucks or cafe location, and others in a salon or other type of space. In this case, you may choose to send the sync only to a particular grouping of terminals, and we would see the grouping of terminals listed here for the different types of machines you have. Your machines will generally be named in a way that makes sense, normally with your cost center, the terminal ID, and a description of the location, such as cafe or Starbucks or CAF. In my case, I could choose to send all updates to group 1, which would show my group 1 terminals. I can return back to all terminal groups. If I choose group 2, I do not have any terminals in this group assigned at the moment. I'll go ahead and go back to all terminals. I can choose to refresh, which would update my statuses if I'm waiting on a sync to go through. However, again, as noted, if you do see pending for an extended period of time, please do speak to the support team. Do not choose to do a repair sync without the Volanté support team's assistance. Let's go ahead and choose done. The last thing I'd like to speak about today is our end of day process. So as a manager, you do have access to a number of different reports to help you support your reconciliation and cash counts at the end of the day. We do want to make sure that your users have clocked out, that they are completed their day, have done their blind cash drops. And we do have access to a number of reports. So I'll go ahead and choose the manager's end of day report. It does give me the ability to choose today's date, or I can hit the calendar and pick any other date that I would like to perform an end of day for. I'll go ahead and choose confirm. And again, I'm not closing the store at this point. I'm just running a end of day report to show me my numbers for a particular date. Do be patient. It does take a few moments as it is syncing up to the cloud to gather the information to run this report for you. So now that my report has loaded on screen, I can see information about the date and time that I'm running my report for. I can see information about different payments that were taken. So quantity of payment types on account for my payroll deduct, cash, credit cards, and any discounts that may have been run. I can see media collection, cash, pay in or payouts. I can also see information about voids and discounts if any of those were done. I can also see the number of transactions performed by each of my employees noted under heads. And I can also see any payments that were taken in and the amounts that were used. Additional discount information is displayed as well, so the number of times particular discounts were used, as well as banking information. So for any of the floats that were put into the machine, we will see it open and a close position for the float. I also see any information about voids that took place, how many voids happened, and any potential fraud reporting information might appear in here as well, related to particular transaction IDs. From here, I can choose to print or I can choose to close. So I'll choose close for now, but you can run reports for today or any other day in the system. End of day reports do work in a similar way. I can choose today's date, or I can go back using my calendar picker to previous months or other days. So again, we'll choose the first, hit confirm, and we'll be patient to give this a moment to load as well. And again, it does take a few minutes for this to happen. So our report has loaded now, and we can see information about the dates and times. We can see the report date that we've selected here at the top. Cash, credit, similar report to our other report, headcounts, discounts, and other voiding reports as well. So again, I could choose to print this report at this time. The last thing we can take a look at is our close day. Now, as our systems run an automatic close day, you will generally not need to close the day unless there was an open transaction preventing the day from closing. The system should automatically close any open transactions for you, but as we saw with our transaction checker, you can go back in and close and void any open transactions. I'm going to go ahead and close for April 30th. We just hit the close button. Do you want to close the day? We can't adjust any transactions. I'll say yes. I'm just going to give that a moment to run through. We do see a message that close day has started and to check back in a few moments. As we can see, no information was run on this day. I'm going to close the 2nd instead. Be sure you want to close the days from the 1st to the 2nd because both days are still open. So I'll say yes. And we're going to let both days close, and we'll be patient while this happens. And as we can see, we have information about the sales for that particular day, the date and time that the day was actually closed on. Our year-to-date numbers, as we can see, are incrementing. I'd like to come back to today specifically. I can hit the Today button, and as we notice, I do have several weeks of unclosed data. So I'm going to go ahead and just pick the 13th, hit close, big date range to close days for, and we'll say yes. So again, it is good to go in and check your close days occasionally, make sure that things are closing correctly. If you do see any discrepancies in your reporting, your Z readings or Z totals aren't updating, we're not seeing any changes to our year-to-date totals, then again, we may need to be patient and run through some end of days. If you do get a message saying the close date already exists, as we had noted, I did try to close from the 13th back. However, I don't see any updates. We can back out from our close day screen, come back into our close day screen again. Let's take a look from the 13th of May backwards. And we do see that these days have closed. So I'm going to come up to today, and I'm going to close from yesterday back. So let's go ahead and choose the 29th. Let's say yes. And we're going to let a multiple set of days close. And it says to check back in a few minutes. So if I back out and I come back into it again on my closed days, let's see where we're at. Okay. Everything from the 29th back has changed, and we do see some changing to our year-to-date totals based on our close amounts for certain days. I'll hit the home button to return back to my home screen, and best practice, as always, at the end of your day, you can choose to clock out. Before I do, I am going to mention that we can run shift reports for our individual cashiers by acting as a cashier in this space. I'm going to see my last shift report click here. And it says the sync is not completed on some of the terminals and may be missing data. If you see this message, please do call the support team. It just means that some of your terminals that are expected to be reporting numbers are not, and this should be resolved. In my case, I'm going to continue. I know some of my terminals are offline, and I don't expect data from those machines, but I will hit continue. So I am getting information from my last shift report, but this is not my current shift report necessarily. So instead, I could run today's shift report. A shift is considered the times between a clock in and a clock out. So I'm going to go ahead and continue and see what my today's shift looks like. And we'll just give it a moment to retrieve data for me. As we can see, I've got a number of different transactions that have taken place. But again, this is about me and my sales I did. If I'd like to see a report for one of my cashiers, I can do a similar function. In this case, I could print it. I'm going to hit close. But what I will do is log out. And I am going to override my login as an employee. I'm going to swipe my card. I'm going to select our cashier employee we've been working with for today's video and say OK. I'm now acting as Mark C. I could do Mark's Today shift report, which does require a manager's override. same error message, but again, not to worry. I know this is based on my space, but again, if you do see an error, please contact us. Okay, so we see his sales numbers. So this allows us to do a reconciliation against the amount of money in the blind drop and make sure that our numbers all match. Again, we get a bit of reporting specifically to Mark in this case. So we could repeat this process for all of our different cashiers coming in, getting their shift report from here as well. And also, if any of your cashiers have forgotten to clock out from their shift, you can go in acting as that cashier employee and clock them out from the system. Do you want to clock out and say yes? So again, we're just going to clock them out. But if they had an open float or open cash drawers, as we've seen in the cashier video, what we should do is reverse the process from them. So reverse their closing float, make sure that the cash drawer change has been removed. I'll go ahead and save that. I'm going to unassign this user from their cash drawer, and I'm going to go ahead and clock them out. And we want to clock out and say yes. So notice I'm not getting any errors now. I've reversed my cashier process and everything is fine. So again, best practice is clock yourself out at the end of your shift too. And then we'll go ahead and do that. We'll swipe our card. We'll come into clocking out. You want to clock out, we'll say yes. And you've been successfully clocked out. In clocked out status, we can't get into cashier mode. We can't get into any of these transactional modes as we see on the left. While I'm clocked out, I do have access to some of the other spaces like barcode management and everything as well. So again, just keep in mind there are a few things that you must clock in order to do. So I'll go ahead and log out. And I'm ready to end my day. Thanks for watching our video, and we hope you're enjoying your new Volanté Enterprise point of sale solution. If you do have any questions related to training for your new system, please reach out to training@volantesystems.com, and we're happy to get you additional information. Thanks so much.